Not taking over the lecture. Hey, thank you all for being here. This is the third speaker in our Sorting Out Race speaker series. We have two more coming up, one official. We have Jeff Tolley, who's coming next week, and then we have Cornell Peewawardy, who is coming in October. So I have flyers for those if you are all interested. But tonight, we are blessed with having Dr. Marco Macias, who is a colleague and also a friend of mine. And I am very pleased to have him here to talk about his sort of take on sorting out race, this idea of the exhibit of finding things in like places, thrift stores, which is what he does for fun. He and his daughters, who are here, they go to thrift stores for fun and they sort out things that are racially sensitive. And so you're getting some firsthand experience here, which he has done a lot of work on this, and I'm very excited to share this with you. So please help me welcome Dr. Marco Macias.
Thank you, Kim, for the warm introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for the invitation, for the avenue, for everything. Today, I'm going to talk about basically what I do for fun, which kind of coincides with the exhibit in a way. We go to thrift shops, we go to the Ark or antique shops here in Hayes, in Wichita. It really is a thing that we like to do. The plug-in for my daughter in the back that collects toys of time frames that I have no context for. If you want to talk about toys and history, you can talk to her after this. I can only scratch the surface of that, but I can scratch the surface of other stuff that I do, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So it's kind of this like chaos, or what do we find, right? It's part of the research that I do. I look at Pancho Villa in particular, and you'll see a lot of that, but there's also like more, like what else do you find in thrift shops or online, which we'll do a little bit of investigating together. But I'll start with the kind of the backdrop. It's a football shirt. I think for the late 90s, Mexican soccer, right, with the Virgen de Guadalupe in the background. So kind of already kind of like this syncretism of like what are we expecting when we're looking at artifacts, cultural artifacts, and what do they have, what do they mean to us? And so of course, this talk really started like about 3 years ago when I found this picture, which is in Wichita, it says the wedding party. And so in the back, you probably might not be able to see what I'm looking at, but it's a Klansman or Klans member, Ku Klux Klan. That's their Sunday best, dressing up for a wedding, right? So some random find, but it's like, oh, okay, so we really do find really interesting things at thrift shops, and trying to understand, some of the motivations. It's of somebody picking this to be their Sunday outfit for a wedding, right? So that's kind of the, what are we going to find? And you never know what you're going to get, right? So these are so in preparation for this talk, we went back to Wichita, went to the antique shop, and these are just like finds from 2 Sundays ago. So again, these are things that are still there, right? They're still waiting for shoppers. And so, and again, part of what we have here in the exhibit, right, is a snapshot of various artifacts from various representations. So really delving into Mexican Americans or Mexicans, right, we have, as part even of this exhibit, the sleepy Mexican, right, which feeds into a bigger stereotype, which is really trying to understand why these kitsch artifacts, why these artifacts have such a resonance, right? And so with the sleepy Mexican, so this plate is from Wichita from 2 weekends ago. You start to unpack. So what does that mean, right? So it creates perceptions or reinforces stereotypes of Mexicans being lazy, right? Of Mexicans falling asleep in corners or being lazy. Right? That's really the stereotype, which again is reinforced by these salt and pepper shakers, or this plate, or a clip from South Park where they go to a museum of stereotypes, and that's when the father says, "Hey, here's a good example of a stereotype," and the reality is the person sleeping there is a janitor. So it's kind of playing off the stereotype of sleepy Mexican. But it's kind of, how do we get to this perception, and why is it something to be careful about, right? Because it might sound innocent, this portrayal of Mexicans being lazy and not wanting to work, right? But then, right, what comes with that perception? And also, where are these perceptions coming from historically? So another find from the thrift shop is this image here from Tijuana from 1955, in which an American tourist, right, is crossing to Tijuana to have probably a weekend with the family, probably the parents in the background, but right, trying to unpack Tijuana itself, which is a border city. So Tijuana is notorious for being kind of this sinful place. But again, how do we get to Tijuana in our perception of Tijuana being this sinful place or this dangerous place? Tijuana is a haven during Prohibition for Americans to go and have drinks and gamble and engage in prostitution, right? So Tijuana becomes this symbol of sin for American tourists, demonized by American tourists, right? But otherwise, people in Mexico don't really care about going to Tijuana for fun. That's not their perception of fun, right? It's a demonized version of the borderlands by Americans. So again, if this resonates to contemporary politics, this is where we start seeing some of these images feed into contemporary politics, right? So again, very innocent picture, but it's already creating and denoting certain artifacts or certain symbolisms. Oh, I forgot to show the link. So let's see if the link works. But one thing that I find fascinating is how you can find an image or an artifact, and then you can start unpacking other things with it, right? So this is an eBay find that is still for sale if you want to buy it, $65.
Yikes.
I'll talk about that in a little bit, but this is oh, I cannot. I want to show you my what I'm looking at. Give me a moment. There's the donkey show on eBay. So this you can buy today on eBay, right? And so it's a book of an exhibit from California. But in it are images of American tourists going to Tijuana, taking pictures like the one we saw. Again, right? They're embracing the stereotype. They're playing with the stereotype, and Mexicans are kind of accepting the money because it is a play of sorts, right? Because you see this image, which I don't think I can make it any bigger, but he has a hat that says burro, right? So essentially a hat that says ass. I don't think he knows what it means, but somebody is definitely giving them the hat and saying, "Hey, you should wear this hat," right? And then she has a hat that says tomorrow, mañana, and then the person on the donkey is caramba, and then Mexico, right? So again, Mexicanos are playing with this, but tourists are going for fun. And so that's how an example of how you can play around and go a little bit further into some of these finds. Let's see. This is from a menu from Louisiana. The typical big hat, right? Which if you go to Mexico nowadays, it'd be hard pressed to find one, because surprise, we dress like people from the United States, right? So when I came here to Hayes, I would get questions about we go back home for the summer, and I would get questions about, is there internet in Mexico? And I would be like, what? really? Like, yeah, like, we have Costco and everything. So that was my answer. One thing to note about this image here is the white, right? It's probably the restaurant owner dressing up as a Mexican selling Mexican-American food. So you already know, like, probably the food is not authentic, whatever that means. Ashtrays. This is from The Find 2 weeks ago. I really found this interesting. It's an ashtray, but this ashtray feeds into the stereotype of the sexy Latina, right? Even though it's a white figure, but it's a souvenir from Mexico. I didn't want to fork out $125, so I didn't buy it. So I don't have it with me. So I was so tempted to buy it though. But again, it starts feeding into these stereotypes that over time develop and create, perceptions that we have of Mexicans. Of course, if you go to Walmart, which I did over the weekend and actually yesterday, these pictures are from the weekend. You can dress up as a salsa or taco or tequila bottle, which again are all stereotypes, right? That feed into certain perceptions of Mexicans liking spicy food, which yes, I do like spicy food. I do like spicy food. But then tacos, that's not the way we eat. That's not even a taco to us. So it's already making me cringe. And that tequila, I don't know what it is. And I don't drink tequila with lime. It removes the flavor from it. Going a little bit more into eBay, which is the other realm of things that I do, is Pancho Villa. And so I specialize in Pancho Villa kitsch and artifacts, which is some of the things you're seeing here, right? Historical Pancho Villa, and then these two novels are from the 19-teens. What I really like about these two novels is the first novel is 1913. It's a very positive portrayal of Villa. And then the 1916 novel, these are dime novels that kids would have read for fun. But again, right, teenagers in the 19-teens are creating perceptions of Mexicans through specific people like Pancho Villa. But even if you take a look at the cinema, right, of the time frame, you have a movie which is called Bronco Billy the Greaser, which again presents Mexican Americans or Mexicanos as bandits, as filthy, as violent, and as alcoholics. Right, so again, all these things are about being reinforced. So these are things that I've found throughout the years buying through eBay, which I'll show you a little bit more in a second. This, again, reinforcing the stereotype of the bandit. So Villa is notoriously famous for attacking Columbus, New Mexico in March of 1916, which then followed a punitive expedition headed by Black Jack Pershing. He failed to capture Villa, and so this image is from 1917. The U.S. is out of Mexico, and Life magazine is poking fun at the U.S. for not capturing Villa. But again, right, the big sombrero, the bandit loot, all that is interplayed. Then this movie poster is from 1934 from a very famous MGM movie called Viva Villa, starring Wallace Beery as Villa, in which Wallace Beery portrays Villa as an alcoholic and a womanizer. He was a womanizer, so that part is correct, I guess. But again, feeds into the chaos, right? If you see the movie, there's they're always fighting, but you never understand why they're fighting for. Like the Mexican Revolution, but there's always violence. So this portrayal of Mexico as being violent, right? And this movie is really, really, really famous throughout Europe. So a lot of your perceptions about Mexico in Europe are essentially created because of this movie. These are some finds that I've again through eBay through the years. This is a French kind of magazine talking about the Wallace Beery movie, right? It's in French, so it has kind of that connotation. And I believe it was MGM propaganda sent to different places to talk, so how they could market the movie. And then that's a sing-along for La Cucaracha, which is again probably one of the most famous Mexican songs that you could hear nowadays, and you would associate, oh, that's Mexico, right? And there's so many variations of the song that this is just one variation of the song. What I really find interesting about the sheet song is it has a Spanish version, which is a little bit more revolutionary in and of itself, and then the Spanish translation is portraying V as a womanizer. It has no revolutionary context whatsoever. But so even the translations within the same sheet song are different. So it's like super interesting. And then, you know, I get to find other random things, like this movie ticket I found like 7 years ago, actually probably like 10 years ago, from this small little town in Nebraska. That this, again, movies circulate, right? So what I like about pop culture is a very strong way in which we receive our understanding of the world. Right? We can read books, but honestly, we probably get most of our cultural understanding from watching movies and other pop culture artifacts, right? So this movie, Via Dead or Alive, being showcased throughout so this is just one example, but this movie was played throughout Kansas, first in the eastern part of the state, and then first the eastern part of the state, and then the western part of the state. So again, throughout Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, this movie was played throughout as like the Wallace Berry movie. So again, popular perceptions of Mexico are being created out of this thing, right? So it's really fun to me to find these things, because as you saw with the picture from Tijuana, like I get to go in to see the context and try to flesh out what all this might entail. Of course, I probably hold one of the biggest Pancho Villa comic book collections in the state. And again, same thing. And I'll show you some examples of the comic books, but these are just like both in Spanish and in English. So, which means that some of these were circulated in the United States for a U.S. audience. Some were circulated in Mexico for a Mexican audience. What I love about these comic books, again, pop culture, right, is eBay. I've received these from Colombia, Argentina, Chile, like all over Latin America, from throughout the United States, some from Europe. So it's fascinating how these comic books, it doesn't matter the language, and you know, comic books are ephemeral, right? They're making their way through all these different places around the world. In this case, they're all talking about one man, which is Pancho Villa. And so that's kind of part of my larger research in how Pancho Villa, the historical figure, is being portrayed and shaped throughout different decades through different mediums. So that's kind of what I do my own research. But this is, you know, a U.S. comic book. That's a Mexican comic book, probably one of the earliest Mexican comic books on Pancho Villa, which is like 1950s, which leads that second comic book. It's going to lead me into probably another realm of research So it's like all these different finds feed into different things that I'm doing, and it's interesting. I think it's really cool. Among the comic books, one of my favorite, which are probably pretty racist, are these. A British publisher came out with a Pancho Villa series, and so when I look at these comic books, they're very detached from any reality. They don't really have a lot of closeness to the historical figure. Not that the other comic books do, but they are much closer to the historical figure. These are kind of, I would say, detached from reality. But again, right, English kids in England are reading this comic book, and they're creating stereotypes, not only about Pancho Villa, but about Mexicans. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, big hats, violent, tropical, native, primitive, right? This is the interior of one of the comic books. And so it's tropical paradise. Of course, Latin America, depending on where you are, looks very different. Not everything is a tropical paradise, right? There are mountains and other landscapes in the region. So, and of course, I just, you know, the portrayal of indigenous folk as being primitive and backwards. So again, this is what youth and people our age, right, are consuming and saying, oh, this must be Mexico. This must be Mexico, right? So I find it super fun. These are tequila bottles. They're decanters. They came out in the 70s, I believe. They're tequila bottles, which again, to me, it's like different portrayals of Villa through time. So, right, different bottles and then historical picture. These are, I would say, maybe not offensive, maybe. But then we get into a bottle like this, which is this one. And so the way you open this bottle is through uncorking the head, right? Which to me is super. You probably, if you understand Villa at all, Villa was decapitated after he was assassinated in 23. His body was decapitated. Somebody that wanted the skull opened the grave in 26 and decapitated the body, and the head is lost. Nobody knows where it is. So for this bottle, for you to open this bottle through essentially decapitating the bottle it's ironic. Of course, the other ironic part to all of this is Villa's a teetotaler. He didn't like to drink alcohol. So for a company to be selling tequila bottles with Villa's image, again blending to Stereotypes, right? Wallace Berry, 1934, is creating perceptions of historical figures that weren't like that. But it's reinforcing stereotypes. Of course, one of the weirdest finds I've had on eBay and in person, because I know where this is or used to be, is Pancho Villa's trigger finger, which is right there. Now, of course, to me, I'm excited, and I'm like, and I talked to the pawn shop owner in El Paso, and he was like, well, somebody came one day and offered me this finger, and I was like, it was a good price. So he bought the finger, not really knowing if it is the finger, and it was on display outside the pawn shop. They also own a lot of other interesting artifacts, like this dissected chupacabras, and they're renowned for having funky stuff. And then a couple of years passed, and I saw this on eBay for about 10 grand, and I was like, I just don't have the money nor the desire for this. And this is one of the things that I collect a lot of these things. So like the comic books, if they're reasonable, I will purchase them. And so that's how I hoard this collection of comic books. Why I do it? Because I like to collect things, because I can do research on them, right? So that's part of my motivation. But the trigger finger is one of the weirdest finds that I've ever encountered. And then we might get into this, well, is it true or not? Like, is it really Villa's trigger finger? And so pop culture wise, it's like, does it really matter though? Because you can brag to people, I have Pancho Villa's trigger finger. The reality is, it's probably not the finger. I have a picture of the decapitated body from 26, and it has all 10 fingers. So I don't think it is. The only way would be to run a DNA test, which there are people out there that are willing to do DNA tests, because Villa had a lot of children. So if you can track a grandchild at this point, you can probably run a DNA test on the finger and find out if this finger is indeed Villa's, trigger finger. These are things one thinks about at night when one cannot sleep. And you contemplate should I have bought the finger? Should I have not bought the finger? What am I going to tell my wife about just 10K going missing? So, these are things that one contemplates. And then one sleeps and doesn't remember about it. One of the finds over the weekend, not this weekend, but 2 weekends ago, were these images. Keystone View Company did these stereo images. I forgot the name. These are two images that are side to side. And you have a fancy contraption that makes the image kind of 3D. These are from the 1910s and 20s. But again, these are just like things you find at the thrift shop. And so to me, as my children could attest to, I was fascinated because I was like, suddenly I had all these images, and my younger one was like, how much money are you going to spend on this? I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the tally is. They weren't that expensive. But so these are images of Mexico and Latin America in general, right? So again, a wonderful find. And I really only fixated mostly on the Mexican and Latin American ones. There are a lot of them for the United States and some from around the world, but this is the find. So what's cool about these images is that you have the image, but on the back part you have some text that accompanies the image. So the text that is here is accompanying the image, which is, I'll read it for you. Tepic is one of the richest and least developed of the Mexican states, but the coffee, sugar, cotton, and tobacco from this state are known for their excellency. Tepic, the capital of the state, is the most primitive and picturesque of the West Coast cities. Right? So again, something written in 19-teens or 1920s, which is reinforcing these ideas of like, okay, Mexico's backwards, you know, and I don't have any sleepy Mexicans in these images, but I'm sure if they would have found them, they would have taken pictures of them. So this is just like an example from the 19-teens or 20s, kind of reinforcing these notions, right? This is from Ecuador, in which you have females making the very famous Panama hat, which actually develops in, I believe, Ecuador or Panama. But if you want a really fancy Panama hat, you go to Ecuador, or at least that's what I've been told from Ecuadorian friends. But it's attesting to like the manual labor that a unskilled worker has to put in to create this gorgeous hat, and then they're not well sold. Like if you're an American tourist or you're a European tourist going to Ecuador, you're not paying really for the amount of investment that somebody's putting in to make this hat. Right? Again, it creates these stereotypes of Latin America being underdeveloped, right? This image I really found fascinating, and I showed it to my colleague Claudio, and he immediately saw a couple of things. So I'm giving him credit for it. But I'll read what the back part says. So these natives are copper-colored people. They were Indians throughout South America when the first white men explored it, and there are still many in northern Argentina and the middle and central Brazil. That's how the quote is. Later on it says, here you see a crowd of these Indians not far from Punta Arena, which is the tippy top of Chile. They are ungainly, ill-formed lot. This particular group is better dressed than many one may see in this section of the country, right? That's most of the context that you have for this image. Now, the Selknam tribe has been extinguished. So, as Claudia was talking to me, illustrating really, this is a group of indigenous Chileans from Punta Arenas in a reservation, and he knows. He told me, take a look at the section over here, at the tippy top, right? The construction material is makeshift, and these were semi-nomad groups. So when he saw the image, he was like, this is an image of like indigenous people that were exterminated in a campaign to essentially kill the indigenous population of Chile by Chilean colonists in a short-lived gold rush. Right? Somebody found gold in this region. They saw these indigenous people as, nuances, exterminated them, reduced them, and now they don't exist anymore. And this is some of the very, there's not a lot of photographies that exist of this group. So again, some of the like really fascinating finds from going to a random thrift shop in Wichita. Right? How these things arrive to certain places is really the interesting thing to me. And of course, I could write a paper if I want to, just about all these images that I'm showing you today. These are street vendors in Mexico. Female street vendors are selling pineapples, bananas, in Córdoba, Veracruz. And then this other image is also from fairly close from Córdoba, Veracruz. And one of the things about this image is, this is actually the first image that I saw of the entire lot. And I was like, wait a minute, I've seen this image before. Like, not this image, but like something similar. So the title of this image is Aztec Indian Woman at a Public Well in Veracruz, right? To me, Aztec woman, it's like, wait a minute, anyway, right? Already kind of creating perceptions of indigenous people. Again, you can see kind of the, again, picture, right? These portrayal of indigenous being backwards. In this case, they're dressed, right? And the image, the text in the back highlights that they are fully dressed, and their cotton blouses are beautiful, and that they are gorgeous. So, even by those kind of points, you're already seeing this image of indigenous females as being sexualized, right? So again, it kind of feeds into this sexy Latina stereotype. And so when I saw this image, it's like wow, like this is, again, post 19-teens, 1920s. So I was like, where have I seen this before? And so the answer is Scott White. Scott White was a famous photographer that settled in Mexico during the Porfiriato, so late 19th century, and was renowned for taking pictures of indigenous females in very sexualized positions, or presenting sexy indigenous females. And this is just an example, right? This female is posing for White in this position, right? They're not like pornographic, but they are sexualized. Right, so again, they're presenting the stereotype of the sexy Latina, and there are many other images of which I don't have any that I really don't want to show you because I don't need to, of indigenous females that are not dressed from the waist up. Right, you can see their breasts. Again, they're hypersexualizing females in general, right, in Latin America. But again, that feeds into the stereotype of sexy Latinas, and so that's where I had seen these other images. Right, again. It might be going back to the image, you don't see it, in the same way, but you still see some of that stereotype and how it's feeding into images like this. So even though the revolution, right, 1920s, you still are seeing perceptions of Mexico being backwards and its population is still being primitive. Right, it's still worth investing in Mexico or conquering it, right, economically or politically. So this is another image also from White water carriers. So again, these things all feed into stereotypes that we still hold nowadays about Mexicanos. So of course I went to China over summer. And I was stuck, my brain is like, okay, what am I gonna find? And of course I did find some things, potato chips for the most part. And of course these are completely detached. So, one thing about, there are certain levels of attachment in terms of, you see things that are like Latin American, Mexican, right? And then you go to other places that are further detached and you see, it's still playing with Mexican or Latin American stereotypes, but you have to, they're a little bit more detached. So like for example, the tacos, right? That really is completely detached. But, sombrero, right? Sarape, that's a very Mexican thing. Potato chip, that looks indigenous, but that's not Mexican to me, that's Incan. It's Andino, right? It's South America. And very, very specific region. So again, but to somebody consuming these potato chips, it's just potato chips. It's completely detached from cultural associations. And then the tacos, of course, are from Disney Shanghai, in which I think pulled pork fish. First of all, in Mexico we don't eat hard shell tacos. We eat like tacos, like It's like tacos. I don't know how to explain it, right? Just we don't eat this type of tacos. Yet this is being sold in Shanghai Disney as a very exotic thing, right? I don't remember if it's in the Pirates of the Caribbean, like part of the park, which is very stereotypical Caribbean, Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So again, it's just these things that you find, and of course, I see these images, I'm like, first of all, as a Mexican, if I'm seeing a plate like that served, these are not going to be good tacos. Because if you're a Mexican, you already know that, tacos that are respectable are not served in taco platters. You just eat them like in a plate, like that's it. Like the greasier, I don't want to say the greasier, the less presentable they are, the more delicious they're going to be, right? So this is like, if I see this, I don't want to pay money for this. This is completely detached, but it's a Chinese brand called I'm Mexican. And so it's really hard to find. And so when I was in China, this keychain was given to me about 15 years ago. But when I was on the lookout for this brand in China, and I did find it, but I didn't want to take a picture of the person wearing the shirt featuring I am Mexican and then the sleepy Mexican on the shirt. I was so close to taking a picture, but I just didn't do it. But again, the funny thing to me is if I ask that person about the shirt, they have no context to what I'm talking about. They'd be like, what are you talking about and why are you approaching me? And then of course I would have to probably say mojigu, and they'd be like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about, right? Because that's one of the things about China that I do like really a lot is spicy food. You can get spicy food. And so when you go to China, if you like spicy food, you can probably get it fairly easy. And then when people from China are looking at you eating spicy food, they're like, why? And you tell them you're from Mexico, and they make that connection. So it was not that hard to find spicy food, which is again a stereotype, right? Because you would consider, well, you can find spicy food throughout Latin America. The answer is no. You can only find it in Mexico, because the rest of Latin America does not really eat chili or spicy food. So again, that's stereotype, right? And of course, I found Mr. Potato here, stereotype, a play on, right? You can make the connections. It looks like Pancho Villa. There is a play here on that, again, bandit, right? How we create these stereotypes and how we approach these. I don't want to say random images, but just images throughout the world. It's fascinating, right? And again, how these things are being created time and time again. I want to show you. I showed you the donkey show, but this is kind of what I do, and I call it an eBay budget because I do spend money on it. But Pancho Villa, I will type it in once in a while. And what I do is the Gringo's Curve. I mean, like that's already piqued my interest, right? I don't do best match because I'm on this site pretty regularly. So I go to, let's see, newest first, because I want to see what the new merchandise is. So right, I can get newspaper covering, a VHS tape. I have no idea what this is, or even if it is via. But I can click on it, see what it is, right? If I want to pay, what, $35 for that, I do not want to pay for it. You have puppets, a belt buckle, a statue of Villa from Tucson, Arizona, right? So, in the 80s, the government of Mexico offered a statue of Villa to the government of Arizona. And because the governor didn't know what that was, he said yes. And then the governor was like, where do we put the statue? Because it's Villa, and he attacked the United States in 1960. And he ended up in the central part of Tucson. That's where he ended up. Again, this is why history is important. This image here, I have no idea. It doesn't make to me, oh, this one. I don't think it's Villa, but somebody's saying, oh, it's Villa. And so, they're trying to make money off of it. So to me, like, I see this and I can dissect things. I'm like, okay, that isn't Villa, of course. And there's a lot of images and things. I I've seen underwear. I've seen things here. But the trigger finger is probably one of the funniest ones. Somebody at some point was trying to sell a molcajete, which is a grindstone, and they were claiming it was Villas, and they were trying to sell it for like $35,000. I'm like, that's ridiculous. But I guess somebody bought it because I never saw it again.
Wow.
It's just, you know, oh, there's another copy of the magazine. Look at that. Huh. I already have it then.
Shopping.
I am shopping. I'm engaging in shopping. Mexico curiosities, right? Again, we can see what there is, and you know, Corona. Oh, Corona. Corona is fun because the thing about Corona is, right, sexualized Latina. The fun thing about Corona is you can find it anywhere in the world, and it tastes pretty much the same. I'm not being sponsored by Corona. This is a postcard, right, of a Mexican curiosity shop, right, baskets, cups, pastries, typical market Mexican curiosities. So, cultural artifacts being sold to tourists. Just you can spend hours here looking for stuff, and but, I mean, again, to me that's super fun because if I find things that catch my eye, you can insert yourself in trying to to see how we get to reinforce stereotypes, or how we, you know, how these things are coming to us and why they're coming to us, why they're being marketed, right? Because to me, one of the other fascinating things about kitsch and artifacts is things are produced to sell. So if they don't sell, then they're not popular, which is, in my own research, when I look at Villa, why I think that's so cool, because they create all these things about Villa, and I guess they sell because, you know, he was pretty darn famous. Let's see. That's my last line. Of course, if you want to go to Walmart and just as a Corona, by all means. No. Thank you.
So questions for Dr. Macias?
Yes.
When did you pick up this hobby of searching for this stuff?
I picked up this hobby like at least 15 years ago. And I picked it up because I was taking a class with a colleague, and they basically told me, like, I collect things and I write about things. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And so that's how I started.
Approximately how many editions of the comic book series do you have? Would you say?
Pancho Villa comic books have been around since at least the 50s, and so in numerous editions and storylines. So I have about 90 comic books, but there are much more because some of them ran for years. But and there's no Pancho Villa comic book archive, so I've never been able to see all of them. And they all depend in 50s, from 70s, they all different, like how they tell the tale of Villa. So the different construct depending on the decade.
Yeah, it seems like you're really fascinated in collecting this. Is there any ethical concern about continuing to put some of the, especially the kitsch, the lazy Mexican artifacts back into the world through thrift stores?
I think the answer is yes. There is a concern, but I mean that's part of the thing, right? That the exhibit, I think, also is making us aware that that these things exist and they're still up for sale. And the danger is the reinforcing of stereotypes that comes with it, right? So when we current politics, when we demonize immigrants and people say, oh, of course, immigrants are demons, right? What's feeding those stereotypes is the dangerous part, because they're coming from these historical things.
I have a question. Sure. I see
Yes.
one of these was some of the pictures when they were showing what pictures, and it could have been from But I distinctly noticed there was a very strong evolution of the representation of Montevideo.
Yes.
Specifically, at one point, he looked like the Brawny Man versus some of the older images looked a little more rugged, you know, a little more wild as opposed to the more cleaner cut, polished version. What do you attribute to those representations?
It depends on what time frame Villa is being looked at. So that's, you know, when I take a look, for example, at,
There's Brawny Man.
yeah, he looks pretty clean there. That's a positive, that's a positive description though, that one over there. But here, so this was produced in 1913, 14, when the United States thought about granting Villa access to guns, ammunition. Actually, they did grant him access to those things. And so this comic book, this dime novel is very like portrays Villa as like the protector of northern Chihuahua. It's like, and so the image is like super positive. And so this is a picture of him in 1914. Got very dressed up. And then the 1916, right, Mexico Bandit, the Tiger Devourer. Something. It's just it has a lot of stereotypes in it. And that's post attack on Columbus, when Villa is portrayed as this menace to society. So depending on the time frame, he gets constructed and built in different ways. So in Mexico, in the 30s and 40s, he is kind of still demonized by the Mexican government. But because average citizens and soldiers that fought with him tried to collectively reinvigorate a positive image until he is incorporated by the government in the 1960s. By which point you get comic books like that one over there from the 50s that are portraying Villa in a much more favorable light as kind of the defender of the poor, the underdog. So that's like, to me, Villa is fascinating because he gets portrayed as the savior of northern Mexico or a womanizer that kills anybody in their path. It's always like, I always find people of Mexican descent that tell me, I have a Pancho Villa story. And I love listening to them because it's like always Pancho Villa came to their town, attacked their grandmother or killed their, you know, significant other, and that's why they left Mexico. And I'm sure, I don't know, I really don't know. And some stories are true, but then for Villa to be everywhere at the same time is kind of difficult also. So.
Well, that's a legend just becoming bigger than the man.
Yep.
Yeah.
Over and over.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Have you encountered? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Have you encountered a person that over history has been characterized to the same extent as Pancho Villa?
Yes, that's a great question.
Particularly in Mexican culture.
In Mexican culture.
Yeah, I mean.
La Malinche
right?
La Malinche gets a really bad rap. I've never seen a lot of cultural artifacts.
Right.
Zapata is another one that gets a lot of love like this. Actually, one of the ones that I've seen, and I actually saw a little bit of some artifacts over the weekend in Wichita, Napoleon. There's a lot of Napoleon and Napoleon era items that are sold as like Napoleonic War type, you know. So there's a lot of like, I won't say, of course, the moment I say ashtray, you're going to go back to this image, but there's a lot of like porcelain, like Napoleon artifacts with Napoleon's face on it. Apparently it was a thing in 19th century France to own Napoleon memorabilia. So to me that's fascinating because that means that we, as a society, we've been collecting these things for longer than we give it credit. Che Guevara, Frida Kahlo, or other Latin America.
Yeah. Seen a lot of Frida.
Yep.
I've got one more question
Go for
for
it.
you. Do you get a sense of what the market is for things like this? I mean, having frequented so many of the pawn shops, do you see a lot of people kind of showing up and wanting to buy stereotypical objects from certain time periods, or do these sit on shelves for a while, or what's your perception of the market for things like this? That fascinates me.
I think it depends. I'm sure there are niche markets. A lot of these artifacts, I don't like I'm gonna probably track this ashtray to see how long it stays in the shelves, because I'm curious for that same reason. The picture of the Klans member, the wedding, I went back I think a month or two after, and it wasn't there anymore. So I was like, somebody bought this or somebody took it out of circulation. So these are things that I do go and check once in a while. And some things will stay there for a while, especially on eBay. So, but yes, like one of the things that as you're collecting and buying and selling things, like as you saw with my very brief overview of Via, I pretty quickly can just dissect what I want or already have, and how much I'm willing to pay for it.
Or how much his
do you
wife
think
is
that
willing to
these,
let
like,
him pay.
portrayals of Latino like figures or Latina figures, do you think it's always evolving into negative I don't know who like portray, like for instance, growing up in my household, my little sister dressed up as Frida Kahlo, or like reading about Frida Kahlo, and over the years it was an evolution, not in the sense of portraying her in the same sense that they would portray Pancho. So like, do you think they're always end up negative, or do you think there's some instances where it's not?
I think you're right. I think some instances are positive reinforcements, right? Because I think Frida Kahlo is a wonderful example, because she is a contemporary, I mean, husband of Leo Rivera, but she is painting from what I would say, like, from a grassroots perspective. And her art has become famous over time. She was famous during her lifetime, yes, but she's become more famous in death. And she kind of, to me, reinforces, a strong female, right?
Mm-hmm.
That can do
Yeah.
things on her own. So yes, the answer is I think some stereotypes can be positive, and then some stereotypes are tricky because I didn't even mention it, but like Speedy Gonzalez gets a lot of I don't think he shows up in cartoons anymore because of negative connotation stereotypes, but for many he also represents positive portrayals of a mouse being able to always defeat to defeat Sylvester, and so to Mexicans watching that's like reinforcing a positive stereotype of Mexicans can defeat the oppressor, right? So it's some of these become tricky, but Frida Kahlo I think is a very good positive example.
All right, well, thank you all for being here, and please help me thank Dr. Macias.